20 years or so ago, the late Donald Dewar had a stroke of genius. Donald, who was a convinced devolutionist, realised from his own experience in the 1970s that one of the reasons that devolution bills had run into the sand was that they attempted to specify everything that was to be devolved to the Scottish Parliament. And that meant that every issue was fought tooth and nail by the last ditchers at Westminster. And Donald recognised if you turned it all round and just said in the bill and then the Act of 1998 what was to be reserved to Westminster and everything else was to be devolved, then what you were doing was a fantastic stroke of principle which not only would make it easier for the bill to go through, which it did, but also would entrench for all time the legitimacy of the Scottish Parliament, because Westminster did not have control over the things that weren't reserved, and that was the principle on which the Parliament was established. Why is this relevant to today? Well, it's relevant because Westminster are now trying to unpick that settlement. Now, it is a settlement that's led to some interesting things over the years. I was several years into my term of office as First Minister when I found out I was in charge, at least the Scottish Parliament was, of bits of Antarctica. Why? Because Antarctica, British Antarctic territories, hadn't been reserved to Westminster, therefore it was devolved to the Scottish Parliament. I traded that in, incidentally, for some additions to devolution legislation. For example, people have often wondered, why is the Scottish Parliament able to pass a climate change bill, the most important issue facing the planet, but wasn't able to fully legislate for a St Andrew's Day holiday? Well, the answer is that back in 1997 at Westminster, climate change wasn't regarded as a serious issue. For some people at Westminster, it still isn't. And therefore it wasn't reserved, therefore it was devolved, and therefore the Scottish Parliament 10 years later was able to unanimously pass the most ambitious climate change legislation in the world. But why is it relevant now? Well, it's relevant now because as part of the Brexit process, the Westminster government is engaged in taking to itself lots of powers. Now, many of the things it's taking powers over don't seem that significant. The food additives legislation, for example. But the principle is hugely significant. Because if the Westminster government, without agreement, is allowed to unpick the devolution settlement, then they could do it for anything. If they do it for one thing, they could do it for another thing. If they do it once, they can do it twice. They can do it for all subjects. And that is why Nicola Sturgeon and Michael Russell, the European Minister, have been absolutely right to take a stand on this matter of principle. Now, in any self-respecting country with a self-respecting mainstream press, this would have been shouted from the rooftops over the last few months. Except the coverage we've got doesn't reflect that, does it? I mean, they were saying just a few days ago that Nicola Sturgeon was isolated because Wales had decided to cave in. Trouble is, of course, that Nicola Sturgeon is backed by the Greens, by the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party in the Scottish Parliament. It's actually the Tory party who are isolated. But that's not the real point. The real point is this: if it were the case that the only people in the whole of Scotland were taking their stand on the basis of principle of what happened back in 1997 and 1998 and not allowing that to be trod upon by Westminster, if the only people in the country who were prepared to stand up for that were Michael Russell and Nicola Sturgeon, they would be absolutely right to stand up for it. And I'll be cheering them on all the way.